if we categorize the greatest leaders we've ever followed as having those traits and characteristics, then why in the world aren't we doing more to build those traits and characteristics in our leaders?
So which traits do we need to develop so people choose to follow us? That's what we're going to unpack today. I'm your host, Tim Spiker, and this is the Be Worth Following podcast. On this show, we talk with exceptional leaders, thinkers, and researchers about what actually drives effective leadership across the globe and over time. You just heard from David Mead. David is an experienced entrepreneur, author, and speaker. And when I say experienced, I mean it. In his career, David has spoken to live audiences on 5 continents, in 23 countries, and to a total of more than 160,000 people. He's also co-authored a book that has sold more than 600,000 copies and has been translated into 25 languages. And on top of all of that, David is a strategic partner with our company, The Aperio, where he helps leaders grow and develop in practical and profound ways. Now, if all of this is sounding a little bit familiar to you, you just might be a longtime listener to the Be Worth Following podcast, because a little over 3 years ago, David joined us on the podcast to share some of that exceptional experience he has. Today, he returns to the podcast to talk about his latest book called Lead with Uncommon Sense. During our discussion, David breaks down what he sees as the 3 key qualities of the leaders we love to follow, while also giving us a preview of the grounded application he shares throughout his new book. And he does so in his usual articulate and inviting way. So lean in as we visit with David Mead about his new book, Lead with Uncommon Sense. Here we go.
One of the main motivations for writing the book actually was because I found myself in my keynotes and in my workshops going very surface level, just because in 45 minutes or a couple hours, it's all you can do. But then I got thinking to myself, like, even if I don't have time to go into all of the detail, I want to have the depth of knowledge myself. I want to know what I'm talking about so that it comes from something, right? And so part of the motivation to write the book was just to get to know my own content better and to dig into it and dive deeper into it so that I could understand it better, so I could relay it better. So even if I didn't say the words that were in the book, the context was there, the foundation was there. And if I had to pull something out that was a little bit deeper, there was something to draw from.
Yeah, the idea of you talking about being surface level, I don't have a category for David Mead and surface because I just don't know you that way. And so, but I also understand the limitations of a 45-minute keynote. There are limitations there. And frankly, that's why I like to do this, what we do on the podcast, because we're not doing the 3 tactics or the 5 tricks, or we're gonna have a longer conversation. So we get to do that today, and I love the opportunity to go a little bit deeper. Well, with that as our kickoff, let's talk about the key ideas that you're wanting people to wrestle with, lean into, and go deep on with this book.
So it's a really interesting sort of dichotomy, if you want to think about it that way, because the concept itself, like most great leadership concepts, it's so simple. And these are the things that I think so often are missed. And so we try to get into the weeds of these complicated models and structures and all these things that, we read all these books, but we're like, you know what? It's not that complicated. You just have to come back and really think about the simplest form. And so just going off the title of the book, which is Lead with Uncommon Sense, the idea is that we all know what great leadership looks like. It's not complicated. It's not hard to think about. Like if I ask you to think about the greatest leader you've ever followed, that person pretty easily comes to mind and you can describe to me what characteristics or traits they have, right? Mm-hmm. And I have asked that question of nearly all of my audiences for the last 8 or 9 years. And the answers that come back are always the same. And they are never, oh man, you should see the way he builds a spreadsheet. Like, oh, her performance reviews, you should sit in on one of those. Of course, those things are important. Absolutely, yes, those things are important. But the things that pop up on the list over and over and over again are the human qualities that they have. They were patient. They were empathic. They listened to me. They were caring. They were honest. They were humble. They were open to suggestion and feedback. Those are the things that we remember. And if we categorize the greatest leaders we've ever followed as having those traits and characteristics, then why in the world aren't we doing more to build those traits and characteristics in our leaders? so that we create leaders that people choose to follow rather than leaders they're obligated to follow, which is what most people in the world are doing. They're obligated to follow somebody because of their job title, and so they do. So lead with uncommon sense, right? It is common sense that we want to follow leaders that have these great human characteristics. And of course, they have to be competent. Of course, they have to know their job. Of course, we have to be able to trust them from a strategic and operational level. And I'm not questioning that. What I'm trying to do is to elevate the human qualities to the level that we revere and view the strategic qualities. Because when you have both of those things, that's where great leadership really lives.
Yeah. Let's dig into it a little bit. Talk, if you could, about some of the main biggest point ideas that you want to make sure that people understand in depth as they get a chance to engage with you through this book.
Sure. So I've come to over rely on just common sense and logic. But I mean, the thing that, and again, this is one of the things that brought you and I together, is when I read the research that you had done that actually put some statistically significant research and numbers behind the importance of this human element of leadership, to the tune of course, 77% of our leadership effectiveness being about who we are, not what we do. I was like, oh my gosh, like and I'd read, of course, all the HBR studies and case and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, I'm so tired of talking about the research. But to meet somebody who actually had done it and to have a conversation about that and to have it verified that way was just awesome. So part of the book, I mean, I don't want to just rely on stories and anecdotes. So, one of the big things that I talk about at the beginning is your research, which is great, which grounds it in data and numbers.
Here we just got to insert a little pause and a little recognition for Vanessa Kiley. Vanessa Kiley, the research partner who, let's be honest, she did the lion's share of the heavy lifting. She was actually the one with her hands on the computer when the who, not what principle and that data that David is talking about came up. So there, Vanessa, if you're out there, thank you so much.
Yes, and Vanessa, your name is in the book. So I didn't attribute all this to
There
Tim.
we go. Good job. Excellent.
So starting with that, I kind of dive into my framework is very simple. It just has 3 parts. And just the context behind that, or the way that I came up with those 3 leadership traits or attributes, is I took a look at the top characteristics that would come up over and over and over and over again as I would ask these people this question to think about the greatest leader they've ever followed and what characteristics they have. And again, they were all of these human related qualities like honesty and listening and caring and being empathic and all of these things. And there were, pretty commonly 8 to 10 to 12 that would come up over and over and over again. And I thought, geez, I wonder if there's any commonalities. Can I simplify this a little bit? Because, we all have a lot to do. I can't remember 8 or 10 or 12 things and action on them simultaneously every single day. And so I thought, well, are there any overlaps? Are there any ways that we can kind of combine these together and make them a little simpler? And so I found that all of those fit within 3 main umbrella characteristics, if you will, which are honesty, humility, and humanity. And I define those perhaps a little bit differently than you would find in a dictionary. So I'll just give you the definitions quickly. So honesty is more than telling the truth. This is what trips most people up. This is the hardest one for people to conceptualize in their brains. As important as telling the truth is and following through on your commitments is, in the context of leadership, I see honesty as aligning your behaviors with your words and your values. So essentially, practice what you preach. This is such a fundamental trust builder in leadership, where I have not seen anything break trust quicker than when a leader says one thing and does something else, especially when it has an impact on their team.
Yeah.
And so honesty means that you behave in alignment with your values and what you say. So honesty. Humility has 2 parts. One of the parts, actually, Tim, was influenced by your work, which is to put others before self. And then the second is to acknowledge weakness and strength without ego. I think generally we think of humility as admitting our weaknesses, our fallibilities, our mistakes, the things we could do better. And that's absolutely a part of it. But what we don't talk about enough is acknowledging our strengths. Leaders are where they are in the positions that they are because of their experience and their talent and their abilities and their networks and their ability to leverage resources and all of these things. They have all of this amazing stuff that they've worked so hard for, but then they downplay it and pretend that they don't have any of that stuff, or that that's not important, or that they're not important because they're afraid of coming across as arrogant. And I get that, because nobody wants to come across as arrogant, but this is where a concept called humble confidence comes in, where we acknowledge our strengths and our abilities and the access to resources that we have and the people that we know and the authority that we have. But rather than looking at all that stuff and saying, hey, look at all this stuff, it's all for me, how do I use it to build my own career and to make myself look better? we say, hey, look at all this stuff I have. How can I use it to build up my team? How can I build it to lift up others to help them reach the goals they have in their career? If you just downplay and diminish what you have or who you are as a leader, you are doing more harm to your team than good. So have humble confidence. Don't let ego get in the way. It's not about you. It's not for you. Sure, you can use some of that stuff to your own advantage, but are you using most of it or enough of it to build up the people around you?
Have you had anybody push back on you on this idea of being able to own and admit, funny word to use when you're talking about your strengths? Have you ever had anybody say, no, I don't think that that's a good idea?
Yeah, I've had a couple. Not a lot, but a couple. Because again, I think they still have that idea in their mind that, well, if I do that, then I'm going to come across as egotistical and arrogant. So and we can talk about this more later, but this is one of the reasons that I'm very intentional in the book about putting simple, everyday examples of what this looks like. Because, I mean, like most of us are not going to do stuff that ends up on the headlines, right? We're not going to do the stuff that everybody's talking about. We're going to do these little things. We're going to go through our day to day, and we're going to miss or take opportunities to be honest, humble, and human. And so I want to help people understand, what does it look like in the everyday simple interaction that you would probably miss, right? So a lot of times people have this idea in their mind of, well, geez, if I get up in front of the entire company at the annual offsite and tell them how great I am, well, that's the worst idea ever. Well, yeah, probably. But if somebody's stuck on a project and you go and say, hey, you know what? I actually, when I was doing your role a few years ago, I ran into this exact same problem. I know how to help. I would love to offer what I know and help get you unstuck. That's what it looks like. That's what humility is. It's admitting your strengths. It's admitting what you know, what you have access to, what you have done before to help other people. That's it.
Yeah. You're reminding me, there's a section of the book, The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, where he has just an amazing description of humility. And part of what he talks about, kind of the fallacy of how we normally approach humility, where this idea that I'm just going to beat myself up at every corner that I can and pretend like I don't have talents, like I don't have skills. And as he unpacked that a little bit, he talked about the idea of thousands of humans being brought to think that humility means pretty women trying to believe that they are ugly and clever men trying to believe that they are fools. And since what they are believing, in many cases, he calls manifest nonsense, and that they can't succeed in believing it, but what happens is then they become, as he puts it, endlessly revolving with their mind on themselves, trying to believe the impossible. And I was like, whoa, I just kind of paused there for a second. I was like, when we deny the skills that we have, it is so ironic that in that moment, we probably become more about the coat of humility rather than the depth of it. We're trying to look humble as opposed to just acknowledging that you have gifts and talents like anybody else does, and you have them to bring to the table. And now that we've acknowledged that, let's move on how to put those into use for other people for the sake of caring for them. And he finishes out that ideal by saying that humility is bringing somebody to a state of mind where that person could design the best cathedral in the world and know it to be the best and rejoice in that fact without being any more or any less glad that they had done it themselves, or even if it had been done by somebody else. Like I'm neutral on who did it. This is great, even if I was the one. And so it's such a different mentality than the perspective that humility is, I just pretend like I have no talents, or I just flog myself all the time.
Right. And, on C.S. Lewis also he has a great quote. It's actually in the book. Humility is not thinking less of ourselves. It's thinking of ourselves less.
Yeah.
It's not about, diminishing ourselves or pretending like we're not good enough, right? It's admitting that we are amazing. We've been given amazing gifts and talents. How do we use those to serve others?
All right. So that has brought us nicely to the cusp of number 3. Let's talk about humanity.
Okay. Humanity, very simply put, is just having a genuine care and concern for the human experience of the people around you. So yes, it's a leadership concept. It could absolutely be your team. But the other point that I make very clearly in the book is leadership requires no title or authority. So we all lead, we all influence. People look to us, whether it's our family, our community, our team, our colleagues, our neighbors. I mean, people are always looking to us and we have that influence, whether we want to admit that or not. And so how do we live our lives in a way that shows that genuine care for the experience of other people? rather than treating them as a number or just another means to an end, or, however we tend to just see people as roles or titles or even outside of work, right? I mean, you look at the person who, I don't know, makes your food or brings it to the pickup window, and you just like, oh, well, it's just a very transactional relationship. But a smile, a compliment, while you're waiting, saying something kind to them, asking them a question, being curious about who they are, what lights them up, all those things are what humanity is.
Hmm. Have you found people that might have done well on the honesty and humility side that don't necessarily show up on the humanity equation as well? Or is there a lot of bleed over that if you've got these two, then you've probably got the third? What's your observation on that?
Yeah, it's a great insight. It actually gets into the way that I structure the framework, which is a Venn diagram. So if you have honesty, humility, and humanity as three separate circles, if you will, and then they align, they overlap in the middle. So I do that for a couple of reasons. One is exactly because of what you said. Generally, if you're displaying honesty, you're displaying either humility or humanity at the same time. I'll give you an example, right? So if honesty is living in alignment with your values and what you say, and you happen to slip up, because we all will, because we're human beings, and all of a sudden your actions don't reflect your values, it takes humility to acknowledge that and recognize it and bring yourself back into alignment, to admit, you know what, guys, I made a mistake. Sorry, here's what I'm going to do to fix it, right? So when you're displaying honesty, there's a little bit of humility that naturally overlaps. And so you can kind of make those connections for, all the different things, which is great. But the real magic of this is when you practice all three of them intentionally together, that's when you get what I call the magic middle, which is where everything overlaps. When you consistently practice honesty, humility, and humanity, the natural result is psychological safety, human connection, and trust. When you see a leader who behaves in alignment with what they say they stand for, that builds trust. When you have a leader who is open to your ideas and suggestions and doesn't have to be the smartest person in the room, that builds human connection. When you create an environment where people know that they are valued, where they're seen and heard and cared about, that creates psychological safety, right? These are natural results to just behaving as a good human being. And if you think about some of the things that are common, I think, to every organization cares about performance. They care about innovation, collaboration, feedback, good communication, well-being, hopefully, right? Mm-hmm. And they try to kind of force these things often through initiatives or bonuses or, team building or like these kind of one-off initiatives. But when you naturally get those things through psychological safety, human connection, and trust, it just is so much more sustainable. Let's put it this way. Think of an environment where you have worked, where trust is pretty absent, psychological safety is not there, and you do not connect with the people around you. How likely are you to throw out an idea that might not work? Very unlikely, right? How likely are you to ask for help from one of your teammates if you're stuck? How likely are you to give your boss feedback or raise a red flag when he proposes a strategy and you kind of see a hole in it?
Yeah, unlikely squared.
No, yeah, right. So you're kind of operating in fear on your own without the help and collaboration of the people around you. How's your performance going to be? Not that great, right? How's your well-being going to be? Are you going to love going to work on Monday? Probably not, right? Whereas if you operate in an environment where psychological safety, connection, and trust are strong, you will come out with an idea that might not work because it's a collaborative environment. And that bad idea, quote unquote, might just spawn a great idea. You're going to ask for help if you're stuck because you have a friend at work. You have people that around you that care about you, that you trust, right? The logic just we see it all over the place. And almost everybody has had an experience on one end of the spectrum or the other. So when you have that natural environment, sustainable results are what just naturally come from that.
Yeah, I think it would be easy. And I probably do this too much in my professional life, but let me for just a moment talk directly to somebody who might be a little bit more on the cynical side, who's listening to this conversation and saying, gosh, it sure sounds convenient that as David and Tim talk about this, everything always turns out in the end. I don't think real life is that way. And I would say to that person, I actually appreciate your natural inclination to pump the brakes and say, hold on a second, what's real? My perspective on that is that this isn't about that collaboration leads everything to be hunky-dory all the time. My perspective on what you just described is that it makes recovery from the inevitable mistakes that will show up and happen in any organization, it makes the recovery faster and more efficient. And so this isn't a recipe for nothing will ever go wrong, and you're just going to cash bigger and bigger checks every month for your business from here to eternity. No, a lot of it to me is about what happens when things don't go well, about when our strategy doesn't work or our go-to-market plan had a bump in the road that we weren't anticipating. Now, what do we do? How do we get back on the rails and move forward? And so much to me of what you're talking about plays really deeply into the recovery process when things haven't gone well.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things there. One is, this is one thing that I've noticed over the years, and I address it in the book, is it is so easy to listen to a TED Talk or to be in some sort of leadership development, keynote or workshop session and to just nod your head and go like, yeah, I mean, this all makes sense. And you answer all the questions the right way and you have all the answers in the room. And it's like this vacuum of perfect leadership. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is so easy. And then you leave and you go back to your desk and it is a complete firestorm. And like nothing that was true or made sense in that room now applies.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I try to be really intentional about in the book is what are some of the common scenarios or situations that will throw you off so you can prepare for them, right? What is going to cause you to think more about yourself than your team? What is going to cause you to decide to bend the rules a little bit just because, like it's going to make us more money in the short term or it's going to make the customer happy in the short term or whatever. So I try to prepare you so that you have these ideas in your mind of like, oh, here's an opportunity to use this. And then give you practical tools to actually address it in the moment. To your point of recovery, the ideal obviously is to intentionally build this type of environment and this type of culture. But of course, like I said before, we're going to screw up, we're going to make mistakes, we're not going to do it right. So I have some foundational practices of like, this is how you should be trying to build that foundation. And when you screw it up, because you will, I do too, every single day, here are the recovery practices. Here are the things that can help you, like you said, rebuild trust faster. Reestablish that connection, reestablish that psychological safety in a way that's quicker than if you just decided to ignore it because you don't know how to address it.
Yeah, you're getting into one of my favorite parts of the book. I have never read a book in my life that has as many practical application examples as this book. It's like half of the book. Like Dave's like, here's the principle and here's the key ideas. Now, let's look at real world practical application. To your point you were just saying a second ago, let's look at the places where we would be most likely to get away from this concept or this idea. And there are pages and pages and pages of these examples. And so if you're a person out there that says, I don't want to read a happy talk book where they just say all the things and I feel good and I don't know what to do afterwards and it's not applied to real life, this is not that book. You don't have to worry about that. Because David has gone to the extent to be very detailed in the applications and very detailed in here are typical places where you will be challenged to live out these things well. How did you get to the idea? Because this is not like one or two examples. This is pages and pages examples. What is it that inspired you to go that far with the application concept of this book?
Well, it's kind of a two-edged sword, right? Because I can give a bunch of examples, but I don't know your specific company or your specific team and all of the things that you're going to come up with. But the idea was if I can give you enough general examples that happen in most companies, right? Which is, you get a tough piece of feedback or you have to give tough feedback or, things are tight and you're tempted to do layoffs as the first option. Like these things that are so common in most organizations, right? That come up over and over again. I figured if I can give you enough of those everyday examples, your mind will start to think differently and you will start to pick up on the things that are unique to your particular scenario or your particular team or your particular leadership. So it's not like that's a menu of like, okay, these are all the things that I have to watch out for. The idea is these ideas or these examples that I give are meant to seed your own thinking of what other things like this am I running into every day that I can be more aware of and more conscious of. Again, it really comes down to that daily simple level, these things that, you can go to work and be a good leader and people can like you and like working for you. But this really takes it more to a granular level of how do I be honest, humble, and human in the things that other people would just probably not even think about.
Yeah.
Or the things that I might not even think about. It's getting to the point where you are refining your own character so that you just show up and become a leader other people choose to follow rather than one they're obligated to follow. And it's not just about what you say. It's not just about the initiatives or the projects that you put in place. It's who you become. And I know that's a huge thing that you and I have in common, Tim. It's who are you becoming? How are you leading yourself and building your own character so that this stuff just naturally comes out? Because the greatest leaders we've ever followed, that's how it appeared to us. It came out from who they were. It's not that they were doing it intentionally anymore.
So as we're talking about all of this practical application and the examples that you provide in the book, as you get further on towards the back of the book, there are a couple of things that you have provided that I think are really unique. Talk a little bit about those, as really, my perspective is that they are valuable tools for those of us that read the book, but share with that a little bit if you could.
Sure. So just going on the line of the practical application stuff, I've really tried to create this sort of as a field guide. My dream is that people will keep it on their desk, and when things come up, they'll be able to go to a particular section, and I've tried to make it easy to find those sections with tabs and things like that, to be able to reference back to some of these common situations. In the back, I've included all of that kind of end of chapter quick reference guide material again, so that it's all in one place. And then I've also added a link to a page on my website that has a few more resources. They're just very simple one-page PDF downloads that can help you in a particular situation to lean toward honesty, humility, and humanity. The thing that I also find really, really helpful with these is whether you're a CEO or a first-time supervisor or an aspiring leader even, the principle is the same. So you can take the principle and put it into your situation, and it works for no matter what your situation is. And so I've really created this book and these resources with each level of leadership in mind, because the principles don't change. It's just how you apply those principles. So a lot of great resources in the back that are additional kind of bonus material. There's one other section back there that I felt impressed to put in there, which is about AI, because I get that question fairly frequently. And obviously, this is something that is our new reality, and it's here and it's not going away. And so people ask me, well, how do you reconcile honesty, humility, and humanity in an age of AI with a technology that cannot do any of those things? And my answer is you don't. What you do is you learn how to harness and use AI to help you think more strategically, to streamline your workflows, to do things more efficiently, to make yourself and your processes better, to save yourself time so that you can have more time to do only the things that you as a human being can do, which is connect with your people, create an amazing culture, and have important conversations. Make sure that you understand and know what your people's goals are and how to help them achieve them. Use AI to help you become more human.
Love it. Love it. As we begin to wrap up our conversation here, talk a little bit about what your hopes are for folks to engage with these three concepts. What are some of the impacts and stories you're hoping come out of the work that you've done to put this book together for us?
Kind of the big vision that I have, and I say this usually at the end of my keynotes and stuff as well, is I like people to imagine that it's 10 or 20 or 30 years in the future. And there's a speaker like me who asks an audience like them to think of the greatest leader they've ever followed. And immediately those people's minds turn to them. To think about what is and it's not even about legacy. It's not about how am I going to be remembered. It's about what is the impact I was able to have on the lives of other people throughout my career or through my leadership. So ultimately, I want this to pass on and have people always have somebody to think of as their greatest leader. But, again, part of the vision that I share in the book is, and this is, again, a little pie in the sky. It's perhaps over idealistic, but what if we could create a world where everybody, not just people in leadership positions, because this is something everybody can work on, everyone can work on their character, right? What if we created, and let's start just with business, right? What if we could create organizations where a vast majority of the people showed up and behaved in line with their values, put other people first and managed their ego, and treated people as human beings? It sounds so simple, but what could we accomplish if a vast majority of people took that on? Because nobody wants to work in an environment where they feel alone or mistrusted or mistreated. We all want to work in an environment where we love going to work. But I think so many people have just put it in their minds that, well, I can't have that. That's just not a reality. That's not how work works. But what if it could?
It is never a bad thing, in my experience, to spend time with David Mead. He is a deep and thoughtful thinker. However, as you heard from our conversation, and even as we talked about the structure of his book, he doesn't just want to spend time in the space of philosophy or theory or ideas. He wants to get to the practical application that's going to help all of us take steps forward in who we are as leaders. And he has built this book in that way. I love the title of it, by the way, Lead with Uncommon Sense. I think it says a lot, and it's very indicative of what you're going to find in the book. And of course, as you can hear, I'm encouraging you to grab it and spend some time with it. You know, this construct of honesty, humility, and humanity, it's really powerful because it gets at, as David shared with us, the vast majority of what causes us to love following somebody. And this is the thing that's kind of unique in life, maybe even scary or disheartening, is that we spend so much time, effort, and energy on things that are more about skills. And David's not saying that skills don't matter. I'm not saying that either. But as he shared, when you ask people, why is that person that you just named as one of the best leaders you've ever followed, why is that person so great? We don't, generally speaking, talk about people's skills. Maybe one slides in there somewhere, but the vast majority of the things that cause people to be the great leaders in our lives when they are, it has to do with one or all three of these categories: honesty, humility, and humanity. And so I love the way that David has broken it down. I love the way that he's guided us towards practical development and application. And I love his heart for it, as you just heard there at the end. What's possible? What if we could? And that's an important question. What if we could get there? Now, there's the macro question regarding, countries in the world and big companies, but there's the micro question there as well, which draws us back to what if we could just in our own spheres of influence, just in our own corner of the world that we're responsible for influencing? What if we could just even for our own families that we influence and lead? And all of that just makes me think about the word impact. And so that leads me to the question that I want to leave you with today. And that is this: are you intentionally thinking about the impact you can make in the lives of those you lead? If not, this is your invitation to start. This is Tim Spiker reminding you to be worth following and to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. If you've heard something valuable today, please share our podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues. And if you're up for it, leave us a 5-star review. Thanks for listening.